Okay, the first thing I wanted to show you, which is just really random, actually the first two things are going to be really random. I had saved I use those little plastic cups like the Gladware things. I don't know if you can you might be able to see the thing that's sort of the impression of the label. But sometimes I leave finish in those containers and I never throw it away and it just sits around. And I thought it'd be pretty cool if I saved these and just use them as samples to show the difference between different types of poly. And we know that standard armor seal or Seal-A-Cell or Minwax polyurethane is pretty durable stuff, right? I mean, that's what you want to use on a kitchen table or a coffee table, something that's going to have the hell beat out of it, basically. So you expect it to be pretty durable, pretty hard. But then we talk about things like spar varnish, stuff that's meant for boating and outdoor exposure, which tends to be really, really durable, but it's almost too soft for most indoor applications. And they say it's soft, you might use it on a project, but we put it in such a thin layer, you don't really get perspective for just how soft it really is compared to regular polyurethane. So by keeping it in these big chunks and letting it cure, you can kind of get an idea just by feeling it. Now this is kind of a tactile thing, so I don't know how much I could really show you that'll give you an appreciation for it, other than maybe hitting it with something. But this is the armor seal, okay, that just solidified. Okay, it's pretty hard. It's got a little bit of give to it, just a slight amount, but that's pretty tough stuff. This is Epiphanes, the stuff that I used on the outdoor finish episode, and it's noticeably soft. I can squeeze it with my fingers, and it really absorbs, the pressure as I'm hitting it. So not that that's like a scientific test or anything, but it's sort of a real good, realistic example of just what the different properties of these two finishes are. So you could see why you might not want a finish that has this sort of spongy property to it on a certain piece of furniture. But there might be something that goes outside where you would want that type of flexibility, because the piece is outside, it's going to expand and contract a lot. So you want to make sure that the finish expands and contracts with it. Otherwise, the finish is going to split. Okay, so just kind of a neat little thing that I thought you guys might like to see. So here's the other thing. A lot of people ask, when is glue, when does it go bad? And you could read this stuff on Titebond's website. They tell you to look for a certain, little bit of chunkiness or stringiness. But the thing is, a lot of times, hobbyists, for instance, don't use a lot of glue. So the stuff sticks around for a long time, and you got to know when it's time to throw it out. And the easiest way to know is, well, if the glue doesn't act right, that's when it's bad. So I just wanted to show you. This is a gallon of Titebond 3 that I just didn't use within enough time, and I want to show you what bad glue looks like. You see how it's almost in two phases? It's pouring, but there's a big chunk that's about to plop out of there. Now, if you like ice cream, this looks really good. But if you have a sick imagination, like I do, this looks really bad. Okay, so it's really inconsistent. It's thick now, barely coming out of the bottle. And it'll be real chunky like this. Okay, that is bad glue. Another thing to look for is real stringiness. But the thing I see the most often is this sort of separation of phases where you'll see visible chunks inside of it. You'll see part of it that's real liquidy, but then another part of it that's a thick chunk. And that's glue that should not be used on a project anymore. I was going to show the Kapex tonight, and I just want to make sure that there is interest to see that. I'm not trying to do a commercial for Festool in any way. I just happen to be working on the video for them right now. The saw is out, and I'd be more than happy to show you some of the features and what I've learned in sort of doing a little bit of research to compare it to other saws and what might make it different and what might make it a good investment for someone, but not a good investment for another person. And just give you just a quick, honest review and show you some of the features. Sound good? I'll just jump right into it. The height itself is one of these really interesting features that Festool came up with. Because a lot of times, if you look at the way the saw is set up, if you cut something dead center here in the middle of the blade, boy, this is going to be really tough. you only have the advantage of sort of the distance between the blade and the arbor. And by the time you hit the arbor, you're done. You can't cut through the arbor, obviously. But if you could manage to cut behind the blade, you could take advantage of the extra height there, and you could actually get a significantly taller piece under the blade, which is kind of neat. But the problem is that's pretty difficult to do, and it's kind of unsafe to try and do on your own. So they have this special lock that locks the saw into position so it starts to work like a chop saw instead of like a slider, because the sliding action is what really causes the problem in those situations. Back here is a little latch, and this latch catches on the body of the saw here and locks it in place. Now see, the head doesn't move anymore. We can now fit a really tall piece under here and make the cut, which is actually now behind the arbor. And we can do it safely because it's not going to move. So the action is much more like a standard chop saw instead of like a sliding compound miter saw. If you have a small shop, like many of us do, and you go to put a sliding compound miter saw in there, the first thing you're going to notice is you're limited in where you can actually place this thing, because typically the rails protrude out the back. So even though this is the back of the saw, when you push the saw all the way in its sort of retracted position, these bars stick out. So if you try to put this up against the wall, you really need a good distance away from the wall for this to actually be installed there. And especially if you go for a big unit like a 12-inch, you're going to have some serious problems. But what they did with the design is they fixed the rails so that the rails actually don't move. The only thing that moves is the head on the rails. So you could put this guy right up against the wall and slide the head back and forth, so all the motion is forward, and you could have it on a pretty small, pretty modest sized workbench right up against the wall. And that comes in handy too if you are an installer, and let's say you're working inside of someone's home and you have a tight area. A lot of times you got to go outside to make a cut. You've got to go to a different room where you've set up the equipment to make the cut. This one, you don't have to do that. You can just put it on the floor in the middle of a 3-foot wide hallway and make all of your cuts right there where you need them. So it's kind of a good convenience factor. Let's talk about dust collection. Now, if you ask me, there's a lot of features on this saw that I may never use, just because, for straightforward, fine woodworking, I'm a little bit less demanding on a miter saw than some people might be. But the one thing that I think is worth its weight in gold on this system is the dust collection. You've got this port back here. You just connect one of the CT vacs to it. And the real key to making this work is this spring-loaded dust shroud back here. Get it off so I could show it to you. Okay, this sits behind the blade, and it cups and sort of directs all of the airflow and the dust right into the vacuum. And unlike most other saws, that even the ones that have a little bit of, little dust collection tube in the back, they still usually don't work. This one actually does work. So I'll try and get a good shot, and I'll cut some MDF, which, as you know, is notorious for a crap load of dust. And let's see if you can actually see it. Ready? Okay, so obviously I cut that a lot slower than I normally would have, but the point is there's no dust at the back here. It's all clean. So nice clean cut. And that shroud does an amazing job of collecting all the dust there. It's pretty sweet. It just goes into the T-track so that if you're doing crown molding, you could put it in a nested position. Most of the time, I've seen people build jigs that do this, or they clamp a board down onto the base of the table. And that works okay. It works great, but it takes a little bit more time because you've got to set that up. And these basically just hook right on, and you can put one on each side if you want to, and it just really works pretty nice. This little guy right there. You put that in the downward position, like this, and that engages it. And what it does is it stops the depth of the head from going down, so you could start to do trenching operations. So you see how it's raising as I turn it? So if you're doing half laps, if you're maybe putting a little groove or a dado in a piece, it's really relatively rough. It's not something you're going to make fine joinery with, but it's not bad, and it's something that most other saws don't have, even as an option. So pretty slick. Okay, so the gadget station that we're building is primarily Hatoba. I wanted the doors to have some lighter colored wood, creamy colored wood, but something with some interest. So I wanted to get a spalted maple for that. The pegs that we're going to be using to sort of peg the tenons are going, like in a green and green style, are going to be ebony, and well, everything else is Hatoba. So I've been talking with a company called Bell Forest Products, and I believe their website is bellforestproducts.com. If I post this video, I'll put a link up so that you guys have it. They got in touch with me, we started talking, I looked at their website, and I was pretty intrigued because they have it set up in such a way that it's really helpful for someone who's going to do mail order. A lot of times, these wood companies, they put a website up, and you can hardly tell that they have a web business. You know, you can order wood, but it's not really user-friendly. You could tell that the primary business, which makes sense, is their local clientele, but they just happen to sell some stuff online. So these guys have a site that's set up, and it just seems like it's really geared toward hobby woodworkers. So they have a lot of these 10 board feet, 20 board feet project packs, and the prices are better than what I can get locally. So then by the time you add in shipping, it's actually not that different, but I might be able to get wood that I don't normally have access to. And in some cases, for figured wood, it's cheaper. Add in the shipping and everything, the total cost is actually cheaper than what I would pay if I drove to some of the places locally and paid a premium price. So the whole point here, I said, you know what? This is a relatively small project. Maybe I could get an order in so that I could see what the quality of their materials are, how is it shipped. And the idea here is for me to experience this myself so that I can then say and we get at least once a month, one or two people asking, hey, who do you recommend for mail order wood? And I've never been able to give a good solid recommendation from my experience. So that's really what this is all about. I've got a big fat piece of 8/4 Hatoba here. The rest of this is 4/4, but it's still nice and thick. So once it acclimates, I'll have no problem planing it down and getting it to, I'll probably still be proud of 3/4, which is great. I never like to go all the way to 3/4. I try to stay as thick as possible, only remove as much material as I need to. Before I get down to the bottom, let me show you, they picked out some terrific spalted maple. Look at this stuff. If somebody can get the link, could you put the link up into the chat so that people can check it out? Okay, so really gorgeous piece of spalted maple. And in fact, what I'm going to do is probably cut these into veneer so I could savor every little morsel. Okay, now this, I'm going to dismantle my rack here just so that I could show you, because I was floored when I saw this. Look at the width on these pieces of Hatoba. Now, I don't even know that my local places would have this, but this is 14.5 inches wide, all one board. That is awesome. So the stuff came in these cardboard. Basically, they probably have these sheets of cardboard, and they customize for different size boxes. And it's really not that thick. I mean, I was surprised at how little packaging is actually in there, but when you think about it, it's hardwood. Once it's wrapped in here and taped all around, what's really going to happen to it? I guess the only risk you might run is if some of it breaks through and you lose a smaller piece. But it arrived perfectly secure from UPS. It was in great shape. Here's their label, if you're interested. Okay, so I was pretty impressed. All in all, for my first, well, they did send me some other material before a smaller order. So technically the second time that I've received an order from them. But for my first and second experiences with mail order, I'm really happy with it, and I would not hesitate in the future to do that again. And the great thing is now I can give you guys a link and say, here's where I usually go, or here's where I recommend, because I've got experience with them. I also got this nice chunk of ebony, which I forgot to show you. Pretty sweet.